Hello humans, Master Dinnerflex here, bringing you the low quality content you deserve, and today I got you with clickbait. You saw Rant, you saw Archetype Handtraps future, you saw Master Dinnerflex. That is what's known as clickbait, take that. But no, this is actually something I wanted to discuss for a while, and I decided, you know what, might as well discuss it on the channel. So, I did a poll, I think like a week or two ago, basically asking everyone's opinion, what do they think of Archetype based hand traps, more specifically turn 0-1. So things like Morgan and Fiendus don't really count because they require you to already play the game, which is irrelevant, honestly, to a hand trap. So I asked people's opinion of it, and it was a vast majority of people wanted this, but what I was actually expecting is like a crushing massive majority. Like, I was expecting like 8 to 10% of people would not be on board, and everyone else would just be like, yeah, come on, let's do this. But it was actually, as you can see over there, it was 22 to 78 or whatever. The reason I was kind of interested in this is because basically most everyone knows the game needs to move this direction, but I think a lot of people are still not on board, and that's kind of what this video is going to be for. Going to give you a lot of things that like really point to why the game needs to move this way. And to be fair, some of the arguments I've heard are like fair. That it's like a very blatant power creep forward. It's not subtle, it is blatant power creep, and it is intense blatant power creep. Well, I agree with that. We already have so many hand traps in the game that I think having this many is a problem on its own, that this is going to be the only way to solve. And I guess now that we got that out of the way, I can explain why this situation is a problem. And that's basically because it creates the old Yu-Gi-Oh problem. Old school Yu-Gi-Oh problem where every deck list was incredibly uniform, playing the same cards for the same goal, for the same reasons, over and over and over again. It got incredibly boring, incredibly stale, so Konami invented the ban list and just put a bunch of cards on there, because they were done seeing them everywhere. Now, this is something they still do. Probably not as much as they used to, but they are totally fine going after like uniform cards being in every deck list. Like, even Desires wasn't that much and they still hit it, and Prosperity is only at 3 in the TCG and everywhere else it's at 1. They do go after these like ultra uniform cards, but they don't go after hand traps. And it's very, very simple. Why? Because going after hand traps, they are a glue that keeps this game playable. Because there is so many degenerate combos in this game you have blatant access to, that if we're to just run around and let it be, the game would be unplayable. And no, these do not check the FTK bullshit decks, but what they do is there are so many of them and people have such easy access to them. Basically, if you're going into an event with an FTK, the only reason you will do well is luck. It will have nothing to do with player skill or anything like that. These cards existing at the numbers they do is designed to make sure FTKs don't do well at events, because it's mathematically impossible. You could argue that checks FTK decks, but in a singular game, cards don't check cards. That's not really how it works. And that's also where these problem with these cards start to come up, is what happens when they're not checking degeneracy. Even like, you could argue Troll and Nibiru, people will argue those cards up and down, but you'll get called a casual for like arguing Ash Blossom and Imperm are a problem. And yes, I think objectively these cards are not very powerful, but there's a difference between one Ash Blossom and Ash Blossom, Bestial, Imperm, Ghost Ogre full combo. There's a complete difference in those two, and that's where the problem of these cards start to arise, is in what I like to call mid-range formats, like the one we're in and the ones in 2021, where basically the game is incredibly dull because all these decks are super linear, super simple, and have high power one card investments, So where the rest of your deck is basically hand traps and generics. And the problem with this kind of deck building and this kind of gameplay is it's actually just Uno. It is the game of Uno, because what you're doing is these hand traps are not designed like Archetype Handtraps are. They are designed to prevent your opponent from making a play, whereas these are made to make a play. So, Ash Blossom, negate a card, that's not too bad. But when I Ash Blossom Imperv Nibiru you, your turn ends, so now I have 3 cards to establish a 1-card game-ending combo, which I can do with my piddly little mid-range deck. So then, you, as the player, have to do the exact same thing, throw enough hand traps that their turn ends, and then wouldn't you know it, you're at Card Rush, aka you're just throwing cards at each other until you're in a top decking war, like old school Yu-Gi-Oh!, except the only difference is any one card could be the end of the game because it's still modern Yu-Gi-Oh! It is just Uno. And because of that, that is so incredibly dull and uninteresting. It's the opposite problem of what we normally get when Yu-Gi-Oh! Has problems. Normally, we have some degenerate bullshit combo enabler or combo deck, too much bullshit going on. But in the reverse, sometimes we get mid-range formats which are the opposite. There is so little bullshit going on that you have incredibly solved duels where you're just playing Uno, and I would recommend actually probably just playing Uno instead. This is kind of a problem, and I don't think it's one people address as a problem normally, because usually you're coming into these formats from something really degenerate like an Ultra Combo deck or a Tier 0 format. You don't even recognize how not interesting these formats are. Not to mention, when you have such high power 1-card combos and a bunch of hand traps, you're also forced into a bunch of generics like Droplet, like Evenly Matched, like D-Barrier, like Eradicator. You're basically forced to play these auto-win cards as well, because the duel is so incredibly linear, you have to have 1-card auto-win cards, even if they might not win against every matchup, just because you need these super minimal investments to win the game. And this all creates an incredibly serious problem, where we are back to the old school Yu-Gi-Oh! Problem of every deck being uniform, while at the same time the cards that cause this to be the case, if you hit them, you create the other problem where there's too much bullshit because every combo deck just gets ultra enabled. So then what's the solution? You're in a rock and a hard place. You either have a really boring game of Uno, or you have a really bullshit game of Yu-Gi-Oh! So what is the solution? And it's up here. Archetype Turn 0 hand traps. And this is why. Where I said these cards are designed to prevent your opponent from making a play, and you're trying to activate as many as possible until your opponent's turn ends, these are the reverse of that. These will interact with the opponent, probably remove their stuff, and basically prevent them from making a play, but that's not their primary purpose. Like, if you look at Havness, what it's designed to do is basically make a boss monster on your opponent's turn get some mills, and this boss monster just so happens to be a disruption. So not only are you hand-trapping your opponent, where you get to check the bullshit combo of Yu-Gi-Oh!, but at the same time, you're the one actually playing. You are not just throwing a card out of your hand and waiting to see what else your opponent does. No, you are the one actually engaging in an interaction. You're actually interacting. You're not just faux interacting. You're not creating a fake, like, I'm going to activate a thing and then call it a day, sit on my thumbs for the next 5 minutes until I activate the one card that also needs to be tossed out of my hand again. That's not what's happening. You're actually participating in the game. And that's the difference. And it's also why I would argue Tier Limit Tier 0 was actually fun. Had nothing to do with it being a Tier 0. Had nothing to do with it being skillful. And it had nothing to do with it being lacking generics in the format. All those things were the case, but all of those things were the case because of the fact that the duel was so interactive on both players' turns that you couldn't just, be dictated by some auto-win floodgates. That you couldn't just, build a board and call it a day. Everything could be punished because both players could play on both turns, so you actually had to think about what you were doing. And all of this was only possible because of cards like Havness and the Ishizu cards making interactions on both players' turns. If you take out both players playing on both turns in tier limits, it goes from arguably the best tier 0 format ever to probably the worst. And as extreme as that is, let's think about how that would play out if it wasn't the case. Everyone would make Dweller, so you had to build your tier limit deck to beat Dweller, which means you were loaded up on a bunch of generic hand traps and a lot of generic cards, which meant your actual main deck engine was incredibly simple and linear to make a really unfun, uninteresting deck where you're just seeing who gets to use Dweller first, aka Uno. Interesting. So the format without Ultra interaction would have created an Uno tier 0 format, like many other Uno formats. So, what if we think about what tier elements did right rather than what they did wrong? And what they did right is they created 2-player interactions. No one took a turn sitting on their thumbs, waiting to go into their turn with however many cards they have left to lose to the board. That wasn't what was happening. You were interacting with them, and because of that, you couldn't just casually throw in a bunch of ploppy auto win cards the same way you could in other formats. And more importantly, these cards not only were not necessary, they were not optimal. Because why would I play a card that stops my opponent when I could do something similar to that, but also play? And that's why I think these cards are the future, and why Konami really needs to step up and start using these cards again, because holy crap, I'm done. I'm so done pretending like this is fun and entertaining gameplay. It fucking sucks. It actually sucks, because it's been this way for like 6 or 7 years, and I don't care. Nothing's changed. Nothing has improved on this formula. It is the same formula of just throwing cards until Uno is reached, and I'm done. I'm done humoring it. I'm done pretending like it's actually fun. Whereas this is fun. This is fun. This is fun. Where you get to Labyrinth, Coup Clock, and just activate a trap on your opponent's turn, pop their cards, and then you get to like set up your engine that you already kind of set up. And it's the same with Rescue Ace. They fucking suck, but they're interesting because I'm not just sitting there waiting. I'm not sitting waiting until my Ash Blossom has to hit the only card I can hit, or I have to droll and just hope that's enough. That's not what's happening. I'm engaging with my opponent, and the skill of me as a player is already being applied before I even have my turn. Sure, it kind of eliminates the point of turns, but that's already the case. We are already past the point that turns matter, and we've been that way for an incredibly long time. We build boards to make interactions on our opponent's turn. We have had hand traps since like what, 2007, and we really started utilizing them in 2011. Like, the concept of turn has already kind of been gone, and if it's going to be gone, I'd rather have it be something interesting where I'm playing and my opponent's playing, and I'm actually playing my deck. I'm not just throwing cards out of my hand because I'm forced to play these cards that throw themselves out of the hand. I think it's time Konami really, really steps up Archetype Handtraps. But I am saying all this knowing they can do wrong, and it's time to show off what happens when they do it wrong, because they put the power of both aspects of these hand traps and these hand traps all into one and create the worst of both worlds. And that takes the form of Bestials. Their effects are incredibly generic. Their ability, their like levels, stats, and way they can utilize resources is incredibly generic. Like, quite literally, you could play Bestial Magnuma and any one other of these random guys in a deck, and when you Magnuma DD Crow your opponent, you get to summon another DD Crow to take another thing out of their graveyard in the end phase, and then going into your turn, you can overlay 2 level 6 into the upcoming Evolsar that is an Omni-Negate. That's kind of a problem. Mainly because, unlike all these other ones, this isn't locked to anything. You can just play this in whatever, whenever, however. And that's where it takes after these, while also taking after these in the wrong order. Because this enables only a 1-player card rush, whereas these enable 2-player card rush. This is 1-player card rush, whereas this is just turnless gameplay. So you get the worst of both worlds, and they need to make sure they do not make cards like this. Make sure they actually are limited on when they can be used and what can use them, rather than just like plop them whatever. Like, this is a mistake, but I don't think you should look at this mistake and saying all these are a mistake, because if anything, these are the way forward, and us going back to these after all these years is a mistake. But yeah, that's about it. Thank you all for watching. Hopefully you enjoyed this little rant. It was a little unorganized, but that's kind of what a rant is. And hopefully I got my point across. I think the game has been stuck on these old hand traps for so long. We need something new. And we also need to make sure we need to understand that hand traps are in the game and always unhit for a reason. But that being said, that shouldn't be the case forever. Otherwise, the game just isn't going to be anything besides Uno. And I'd rather us get more cards like this, so we're actually showing each other our decks, we're actually playing the game with each other, and we're actually seeing who's the better player, because these don't do that. These are not made for that. They're not doing that. They're made to make sure FTKs aren't doing well at, like, events, whereas these honestly do what hand traps do better when it comes to creating interactive games. So I'd rather we get more of these, and I think we should. But yep, that's about it. Thank you all for watching, and remember, Master Dinner Flax would take your soul.